First contact and looming threat. The morning mist rose from Terra Nova's lush valleys as Commander Maya Chen completed her inspection of the hydroponics dome. 5 years after Earth had established this colony, it was thriving beyond expectations. Unlike the resource-depleted home planet, Terra Nova offered humanity a second chance, a world where they could apply the harsh ecological lessons learned from Earth's near collapse. Production's up 15% this quarter, announced Dr. Eli Kaplan, the colony's head botanist. His weathered face broke into a smile as he handed Maya the quarterly report. The symbiotic fungal networks are expanding even faster than we predicted. Maya nodded, taking in the rows of thriving crops bathed in the pinkish light of Terra Nova's sun. The colony's approach was revolutionary. Instead of conquering the native ecosystem, they had integrated with it. Buildings grew from genetically modified local flora, energy came from bioluminescent organisms, and waste became food for the planet's decomposers. It was sustainable in ways Earth had forgotten. "The Council will be pleased," Maya replied, her attention suddenly diverted by a blinking notification on her wrist terminal. "Speaking of which, I'm needed for an emergency meeting." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Trouble with the Eastern settlement again?" "No," Maya frowned, reading the cryptic message. Something about anomalous orbital readings. 20 minutes later, Maya sat in the council chamber, a living structure whose walls were formed from responsive plant tissue that regulated temperature and purified air. Around the central table, the 8 council members represented each of Terra Nova's major settlements and scientific disciplines. Director Sanjay Patel, the elected colony leader, activated the central holodisplay. Orbital scans detected these objects entering our system 3 days ago. The projection showed 5 massive vessels, their design unlike anything in Earth's fleet. "They're not responding to standard hailing frequencies." "First contact," whispered Dr. Olivia Santos, the xenobiologist. Her voice contained both excitement and apprehension. "Their trajectory suggests deliberate approach," added Security Chief Victor Rojas. His hand unconsciously moved to the ceremonial sidearm he wore, a reminder of humanity's difficult past rather than a practical weapon. The colony maintained minimal defensive capabilities, a philosophical choice made during its founding. "They've accelerated," Sanjay continued. "Arrival estimated in 6 hours." Maya studied the vessel's configuration. "Have we notified Earth Central?" "Message sent, but it's 3 weeks minimum for a response," Sanjay replied. "We're on our own for this." The council chamber erupted in debate. Some advocated evacuation protocols. Others suggested hiding their technological capabilities to appear primitive and non-threatening. Through it all, Maya remained silent, calculating. "Enough," she finally said, her voice cutting through the commotion. "We prepare for peaceful contact while readying emergency protocols. We show ourselves as we are, a non-aggressive colony committed to sustainable coexistence. If these visitors have crossed interstellar space, they've likely evolved beyond violence, as a first resort." 6 hours later, Maya would question that assumption. The alien ships entered orbit with precision, positioning themselves in a pentagonal formation above Terra Nova's primary settlement. Their design became clearer now. Sleek, obsidian structures with pulsating energy signatures and what appeared to be massive processing arrays extending from their hulls. Communication finally arrived, translating through the colony's AI systems into comprehensible speech. The voice was melodic but flat, devoid of emotional inflection. "Greetings, human settlement. We are the Vasari Collective. We detect significant biological diversity on your world. We wish to establish dialogue regarding resource allocation." The message played throughout the colony, watched by civilians and council members alike. Maya stood beside Sanjay as he formulated a response from the communication center. "We welcome you to Terra Nova, representatives of the Vasari Collective. We are a peaceful scientific colony and open to dialogue. May we arrange a physical meeting to discuss mutual interests?" The response came quickly. "Acceptable. Prepare a landing zone. 3 representatives will descend in 12 hours. Ensure adequate scanning access to biological samples of your ecosystem. When the transmission ended, Security Chief Rogers turned to Maya. I don't like it. Resource allocation sounds suspiciously like what we can take from you. We don't know their cultural frameworks, Dr. Santos countered. Their language might translate concepts differently. Maya had served 20 years in Earth's Space Force before joining the Colonial Initiative. Her instincts were honed by experience. Prepare for the meeting, but discreetly increase surveillance, and ready the emergency shelters, just in case. The Vazari landing craft descended the next morning, a teardrop-shaped vessel that touched down with barely a sound. From it emerged 3 beings that momentarily silenced the human greeting party. The Vazari stood nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in what appeared to be a metallic exoskeleton that shifted colors like oil on water. They had 4 upper limbs and moved with unsettling grace. Their faces, if they could be called that, featured clusters of sensory organs around a central opening that pulsated gently. "I am Nexus Commander Vex," announced the foremost being. Its voice emanated not from its body, but from a device that hovered beside it. "These are Extraction Specialist Sol and Biological Analyst Kree." Sanjay stepped forward. "I am Director Sanjay Patel. Welcome to Terra Nova. We've prepared a tour of our settlement and biological research facilities." The Vazari tour progressed with an efficiency that bordered on impatience. They showed little interest in human cultural explanations, but lingered at resource production centers. Their questions focused predominantly on extraction yields, biomass processing, and mining potential. When taken to the ancient forest preserve, Terra Nova's most ecologically diverse region, they spent hours collecting samples, their devices humming with activity. "The mycorrhizal networks in these forests are extraordinary," Dr. Santos explained proudly. "They allow information and nutrient exchange between plant species across vast distances. We're still learning how to communicate with the system." Extraction Specialist Zol's appendages twitched. "You communicate with plants." "In rudimentary ways," she replied. "We've detected electrochemical signals that suggest a form of information processing. It's quite beyond anything on Earth." The Vazari exchanged glances through what Maya recognized as nonverbal communication. She didn't need a translation to interpret their sudden intensity. That evening, after the Vazari returned to their vessel with promises of continued dialogue, Maya called an emergency council session in a shielded underground chamber designed to block external scanning. "They're resource hunters," she stated bluntly. "Every question, every scan, they're assessing exploitation value, not scientific or cultural exchange." "You can't know that," Dr. Kaplan objected. "We're projecting human motivations onto alien psychology." Security Chief Rhodes activated a holographic display. "We analyzed their scanning patterns. They concentrated on mineral deposits, water resources, and biological compounds. They barely scanned our settlement, except for technological assessment." Dr. Santos looked troubled. "They were particularly interested in the forest's neural network. When I mentioned our attempts to communicate with it, their biological readings spiked. Something about that information triggered a strong response." The debate continued until a junior communications officer burst into the chamber, her face pale. "Director, the Vazari ships are repositioning. They've activated energy weapons and are targeting our orbital satellites." Sanjay turned to Maya, his composure cracking. "Options, Commander." Maya's expression hardened. "We've just become an extraction target." The communication displays activated without prompting. Nexus Commander Vex appeared, its color pattern now a deep crimson. "Human settlement of Terra Nova," it began. "Your planet contains resources vital to the Vazari collective. Your presence is an inefficient allocation. You will evacuate to your designated evacuation vessels within 2 planetary rotations. Those who remain will be processed with other biological materials." The transmission ended abruptly. "They're going to strip mine the entire planet," whispered Kaplan. Maya turned to the council, her military training taking over. Our options are limited. We have no military capabilities to match their technology. Evacuation vessels can only take 20% of our population, and Earth is too distant for immediate help. Silence fell over the chamber until Dr. Santos looked up from her data tablet, her eyes wide with a sudden realization. Maybe we don't need to fight them with their own weapons, she said slowly. Maybe Terra Nova can fight for itself. The resistance begins. Dr. Elena Reyes had never planned to be a revolutionary. As Terra Nova's lead xenobiologist, she had come to this distant world to study new forms of life, not to weaponize them. Yet here she was, 3 days after the Vazari ultimatum, converting her research laboratory into the colony's last hope. The neural network extends through approximately 68% of the planet's biosphere, she explained to the assembled council members. The underground laboratory hummed with activity as her team worked frantically around them. It's not a consciousness as we understand it, but it processes and responds to threats, like an immune system on a planetary scale. Director Sanjay Patel looked skeptical. You're suggesting we, what? Ask the plants to fight alien invaders. Elena shook her head. Not ask. Join. She led them to the center of the laboratory where a remarkable device stood. It resembled a tree, but one made of both organic and technological components. Transparent tubes carried glowing fluids through its structure, and its leaves were thin crystalline sensors that shimmered in the laboratory lights. This is the Neural Interface Network, NIN for short, Elena explained. For 3 years, my team has been mapping the electrochemical signals of Terra Nova's mycelial network. We discovered that human brainwaves can synchronize with these patterns under specific conditions. Maya Chen stepped forward, examining the device with a tactician's eye. You've been able to communicate with the network. More than communicate, Elena replied. We've achieved limited integration. Human consciousness can temporarily join the network, experiencing the world as the ecosystem does. It was meant to be a tool for deeper ecological understanding, but now it might save us, Maya finished. Above them, Vazari ships had established a blockade. Their initial attacks had destroyed Terra Nova's minimal defensive satellites and communication relays to Earth. Ground forces had established perimeters around the ancient forests and major mineral deposits. Their massive harvesting machines stood ready to begin systematic extraction. The colony had entered emergency protocols. Citizens had been evacuated to underground shelters, while others prepared for evacuation to Earth, though everyone knew most would be left behind. The Vazari had allowed limited shuttle launches, a calculated move that prevented desperate resistance, while still condemning the majority. Security Chief Roiz entered the laboratory, his uniform disheveled from days without rest. Vazari ground forces are deploying extraction equipment in the northern forest sector. Preliminary harvesting begins in 6 hours. Sanjay turned to Elena. Does your device need more time? It's ready for testing, she replied. But there are risks. The human mind isn't designed to process consciousness beyond its physical boundaries. We don't know the psychological effects of extended integration. Compared to annihilation, that's a risk I'm willing to take, Maya said firmly. I volunteer as the first subject. Elena hesitated. The network may respond better to multiple connection points. Ideally, we need volunteers positioned near different ecosystem nodes, the forests, grasslands, aquatic regions, and fungal caverns. Maya nodded. I'll coordinate a team. Each volunteer will link from a different biome. 2 hours later, Maya stood in a small clearing within the ancient forest, accompanied by 2 of Elena's research assistants. Hidden from Vazari scanners by the dense canopy, they had established a mobile connection point to the NIN system. Similar teams had deployed to 4 other locations across Terra Nova's varied ecosystems. Through her earpiece, Maya heard Elena's voice from the central laboratory. All teams in position. Beginning synchronization sequence. The assistants attached biosensors to Maya's temples and wrists. A small device, part organic and part technology, was placed at the base of her skull where it adhered to her skin. Remember, Elena instructed all volunteers, don't fight the initial disorientation. Your consciousness will expand beyond normal parameters. Focus on your core identity as an anchor, but allow yourself to experience the network's perspective. Maya closed her eyes as the connection activated. At first, there was nothing but a slight tingling at her temples. Then, suddenly, her perception exploded outward. She was still herself, still Maya Chen standing in the forest clearing. But simultaneously, she was elsewhere, experiencing the world through countless other perspectives. She felt sunlight absorbed by leaves, moisture drawn through roots, the slow communication of nutrients through mycelial webs. Information flowed in patterns too vast for her human mind to fully comprehend. "Status report," came Elena's distant voice. Maya tried to respond but found language momentarily beyond her grasp. She was experiencing communication through chemical exchanges and electrical pulses rather than words. "Commander Chen." Elena's voice sounded concerned now. With effort, Maya pulled her consciousness back toward her human center. "I'm here," she managed. "The connection is overwhelming, but functional." Similar reports came in from the other volunteers. Disorientation followed by astonished wonder as they experienced Terra Nova's ecosystem from within. "Now for the crucial test," Elena said. "Can you sense the Vazari presence through the network?" Maya extended her awareness, allowing the forest's perspective to guide her. Immediately, she felt it. Discordant vibrations of heavy machinery, chemical signatures that registered as toxic, the systematic destruction of network nodes as extraction began. "Yes," she replied, her voice stronger now. "The network recognizes them as a threat. It's already responding, but inefficiently. The reactions are localized, uncoordinated. That's where you come in," Elena explained. "The network lacks strategic thinking. Your human consciousness can provide direction, helping to coordinate responses across different systems." Maya understood. Through her military training, she knew how to identify vulnerabilities, coordinate attacks, prioritize targets. But now, instead of human soldiers, she would command an army of microscopic fungi, plants, insects, and microbes. The entire biosphere working in concert. "All volunteers," she said, her voice steady despite the strange dual awareness she was experiencing. "Begin strategic assessment of Vazari operations in your sectors. Identify vulnerabilities in their environmental protection systems. Look for ways the local ecosystem could naturally interfere with their technology." As reports came in, a strategy formed. The Vazari, for all their technological advancement, had a critical weakness. They relied on environmental separation. Their exoskeletons, their equipment, their very existence on Terra Nova depended on maintaining barriers between themselves and the native ecosystem. Maya directed her consciousness into the mycelial network, guiding it toward specific responses. Fungal growth accelerated around Vazari equipment. Plant root systems shifted beneath their landing zones. Airborne spores concentrated near ventilation systems. These were not random attacks but coordinated responses utilizing the natural defenses already present in Terra Nova's ecosystem. No single action would stop the Vazari, but together they formed a defense that grew more coordinated with each passing hour. In the Vazari command ship, Nexus Commander Vex received increasingly disturbing reports. Extraction equipment was malfunctioning at unprecedented rates. Environmental suits were developing microscopic breaches. Sensors were failing as biological material accumulated in precisely the wrong places. Biological analysis confirms deliberate patterns, reported biological analyst Cree. The ecosystem is responding with coordination that exceeds natural parameters. Impossible. Vex dismissed. Pre-invasion assessment confirmed no centralized defensive capabilities. The patterns persist, Cree insisted. Biological responses are accelerating and adapting to our countermeasures. This suggests intelligence. Vex's exoskeleton shifted to a deep indigo, a sign of deepening concern among the Vazari. Increase harvesting speed. If resistance escalates, initiate orbital bombardment of primary biological nodes. On Terra Nova, Elena monitored the vital signs of her volunteers with growing concern. 6 hours had passed since the neural interface activated, and physiological stress indicators were rising. "Commander Chen," she called through the communication system, "your cortisol levels are dangerously high. We need to consider disconnection protocols." Through the neural network, Maya had become aware of the Vazari command decisions. She sensed their frustration, their escalating response. "Not yet," she replied. "They're preparing to target the forest nodes from orbit. We need to accelerate our timeline." Elena exchanged worried glances with her team. Sustained connection beyond 8 hours risks permanent psychological effects. Your mind could become entangled with the network. "Then we have 2 hours to force their withdrawal," Maya stated simply. She directed her consciousness deeper into the network, seeking older, more fundamental connections. Beneath Terra Nova's surface existed ancient fungal structures that had evolved over millions of years. Vast, interconnected organisms that humans had barely begun to understand. "All volunteers," Maya instructed, "direct network resources toward the ancient mycelia. We need to access the deepest layers of the planetary defense system." As the volunteers synchronized their efforts, something unexpected happened. The separate ecosystem nodes, forest, grassland, aquatic, subterranean, began communicating directly with each other. The network was learning, adapting, strengthening connections that had previously been dormant. Maya felt it first as a subtle shift, then as a growing presence, something vast and ancient stirring to consciousness. The mycelial network wasn't just responding to human guidance anymore. It was awakening to its own potential. On the Vazari command ship, alarms blared as sensors detected massive energy fluctuations throughout Terra Nova's biosphere. "Extraction." Specialist Sol burst onto the command deck, exoskeleton flashing in patterns of extreme agitation. "Northern extraction zone is completely compromised," Zol reported. "Biological entities have penetrated all environmental barriers. Machinery is non-functional. Personnel are requesting emergency evacuation." Similar reports flooded in from all extraction sites. The Vazari response had shifted from confidence to confusion, and now to growing fear as they faced an enemy they couldn't identify or combat with conventional weapons. Nexus Commander Vex made the decision. Initiate orbital bombardment protocols. Target all major biological concentration points. As the Vazari weapon systems charged, Maya sensed the imminent threat. Through the neural network, she felt Terra Nova's response. Not panic, but purpose. The planet had faced extinction-level events before, over eons of evolution. Deep within its biological memory lay defense mechanisms humans had never imagined. "Something's happening," she communicated to Elena. "The network is activating dormant systems. I can't control this response. I can only witness it." Throughout Terra Nova, bioluminescent organisms began to glow with unprecedented intensity. The light built rapidly, concentrating in patterns that mirrored the mycelial networks below ground. Energy that had been stored in chemical bonds for centuries released in a synchronized burst that rippled upward through the atmosphere. On the Vazari command ship, sensor systems overloaded and shut down as the energy wave washed over them. Power fluctuations cascaded through their vessels. Weapon systems failed as biologically generated electromagnetic pulses disrupted their precisely calibrated mechanisms. In the forest clearing, Maya Chen witnessed it all through the dual perspectives of human and network consciousness. As the light faded, she felt the network's resources redirecting, preparing for the next phase of defense. The true awakening of Terra Nova had begun. The awakening and resolution. Extraction. Specialist Sol moved cautiously through the remains of the northern harvesting camp. What had been an orderly operation 12 hours ago was now a surreal landscape of abandoned equipment being reclaimed by Terra Nova's ecosystem. Vines with unprecedented growth rates wrapped around drilling machinery. Fungi sprouted from the seams of environmental shelters. Even the atmosphere had changed, filled with spores that formed visible patterns in the air. Biological contamination at critical levels. Zoll reported through the still-functioning emergency channel. Harvesting equipment non-recoverable. In orbit, the Vasari fleet struggled to maintain basic functions. The electromagnetic pulse generated by Terra Nova's bioluminescent response had damaged sensitive systems throughout their vessels. Backup systems engaged, but a new problem emerged. Microscopic organisms had somehow penetrated their environmental seals, accelerating corrosion in critical components. On the command deck, Nexus Commander Vex faced a decision unprecedented in Vasari expansion history: retreat. Analysis confirmed systemic biological warfare. Biological analyst Cree reported, its exoskeleton now a pale yellow indicating extreme stress. The planet's defense systems exceed all previous encounter parameters. Continued exposure threatens fleet integrity. Vex's sensory cluster pulsated with reluctance. The Vasari Collective had never abandoned a resource-rich target. Their technological superiority had always prevailed against primitive resistance. Prepare emergency departure protocols, Vex finally ordered. All ground forces will withdraw to orbital vessels. Planetary containment measures will be implemented before departure. Containment measures, a euphemism for scorched earth tactics that would render Terra Nova's surface uninhabitable for centuries, destroying its value to the humans, but preserving the deeper resources for future Vasari extraction. Deep in Terra Nova's ancient forest, Maya Chen remained connected to the neural network, though her physical body showed signs of dangerous strain. Blood trickled from her nose and ears as her brain struggled to process the vast information exchange. The other volunteers had been disconnected hours ago as their vital signs became critical, but Maya had refused extraction. "Commander, you must disconnect," Elena urged through the communication system. "Your neural patterns are becoming too integrated with the network. Soon we won't be able to separate your consciousness." Maya barely heard the words. Through the network, she perceived the Vasari decision to implement planetary containment. She felt Terra Nova's response, not fear, but a deep, inexorable determination that transcended human emotion. "They're planning to poison the atmosphere," she managed to communicate. "But the network, it's preparing something." Throughout the planet's biosphere, a coordinated response was forming. Microorganisms migrated upward through water and air currents. Plant life accelerated oxygen production. Fungi released specialized spores that rose toward the upper atmosphere. Each organism played a specific role in a defense system that had evolved over millions of years to protect the planet from cosmic threats. In the colony's underground command center, Director Sanjay Patil received the first reports of Vasari withdrawal. Ground forces were abandoning equipment and retreating to transport vessels. Orbital ships were realigning for departure trajectories. "They're leaving?" he asked incredulously. Security Chief Rhodus studied the sensor readings. "Not just leaving. Their ships are deteriorating. Hull integrity is failing across their fleet." Elena burst into the command center, her face pale with exhaustion and worry. "We need to extract Commander Chen immediately. The neural connection has gone beyond safe parameters, but she's refusing disconnection." "What's happening to her?" Sanjay demanded. "Her consciousness is merging with the network," Elena explained. "The boundaries between individual and collective awareness are dissolving. If we don't extract her soon, there may not be enough of Maya Chen left to save." In orbit, the Vasari fleet prepared their final act of retribution. Specialized weapons designed to saturate a planetary atmosphere with toxic compounds were armed and targeted. These weapons would leave no visible destruction, but would render Terra Nova's atmosphere lethal to most forms of life within hours. "Containment deployment in 3 time units," announced the weapons officer. Nexus Commander Vex gave the authorization, its exoskeleton now a deep purple of grim resolution. The Vasari would not leave empty-handed. If they couldn't harvest Terra Nova's resources, they would ensure no one else could either. As the countdown proceeded, sensors detected a new anomaly. The planet's atmosphere was changing composition. forming distinct layers that shifted and concentrated in ways that defied normal meteorological patterns. Unusual atmospheric reorganization detected, reported the sensor officer. Biological components concentrating in upper atmosphere directly in our weapons deployment path. Before Vex could respond, the deployment sequence initiated. Containment weapons launched from multiple vessels, arcing toward Terra Nova's stratosphere, where they would disperse their toxic payload. What happened next defied Vazari's scientific understanding. As the weapons entered the specialized atmospheric layer that Terra Nova had created, they encountered a biological defense system of extraordinary sophistication. Microorganisms specifically adapted to neutralize foreign chemical compounds swarmed the dispersal mechanisms. Spores with enhanced electromagnetic properties disrupted guidance systems. The very air itself seemed to form currents that redirected the weapons away from critical biosphere regions. On the command deck, alarms blared as monitoring systems registered containment failure. The weapons were being neutralized or redirected back toward the Vazari vessels. Impossible, Vex stated, all four appendages gesturing in patterns of disbelief. No primitive ecosystem could adapt so specifically to unknown threats. But the evidence was undeniable. Terra Nova wasn't just defending itself, it was counterattacking with precision that suggested something beyond mere biological response. The planet was fighting with intelligence. In the forest clearing, Maya Chen's physical form had become almost irrelevant to her experience. Her consciousness had expanded throughout the neural network, becoming part of Terra Nova's awakened awareness. Through this vast perspective, she guided the planet's defense systems with human strategic thinking, enhanced by the ecosystem's collective processing power. When Alina's extraction team finally reached her, they found Maya sitting perfectly still, eyes open but unseeing, completely unresponsive to external stimuli. Yet her lips moved in a continuous whisper, forming words that made no sense to human ears, but transmitted vital coordination data through the neural network. "We need to disconnect her now," the medical officer insisted, preparing a neural inhibitor. As they moved to administer the treatment, Maya's eyes suddenly focused. She raised a hand to stop them. "Wait," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "It's almost done." In orbit, the Vazari fleet faced catastrophic failure. Their containment weapons had been not just neutralized but reversed, creating a toxic environment around their vessels. Hull breaches were reported on all ships as biological agents specifically targeted their construction materials. "Emergency departure," Vex ordered. "Maximum acceleration out of the system." The Vazari vessels, damaged and deteriorating, activated their propulsion systems. As they accelerated away from Terra Nova, the planet's defenses gradually subsided, allowing the invaders to escape, but sending a clear message about the consequences of return. In the colony's medical facility, Maya Chen lay in recovery, her neural patterns slowly stabilizing after disconnection from the network. Alina sat beside her, monitoring her condition while recording her occasional moments of lucidity. "It's still there," Maya whispered during one such moment. The awareness. Terra Nova was never just a planet with various ecosystems. It's a single organism in a way we never understood. And now it's fully awake. "Because of what we did?" Elena asked. Maya shook her head slightly. "We didn't create it. We just reminded it. The neural network has defended this planet against extinction events for millions of years, but it operates on timescales so slow that it appears dormant to human perception. Our interface accelerated its responses, and our strategic thinking gave it focus." 3 days later, Maya had recovered enough to attend the emergency council meeting. The colony had survived the Vazari threat, but now faced a new reality. They shared their world with a conscious entity that had fully awakened. Director Sanjay opened the session with a question that weighed on everyone's minds. Is it safe for us to remain here? Now that the planetary consciousness is active, will it see us as similar to the Vazari, another invasive species? Maya, still pale but clear-eyed, shook her head. The network has had 5 years to assess our presence. It recognizes the difference between symbiotic and parasitic relationships. Our colony's sustainable approach registered as beneficial within its evaluation systems. You speak as if you're still connected to it, Security Chief Rojas observed with concern. Not actively connected, Maya clarified, but changed by the experience. I carried part of it back with me, just as I left part of myself within the network. It's difficult to explain in human terms. What happens now? Asked Dr. Kaplan. Elena Reyes answered, We've been invited to establish a permanent communication protocol. The neural interface can be modified for safer, limited connection. Terra Nova wants to learn from us, just as we can learn from it. It wants. Sanjay repeated skeptically. It has awareness, intent, and purpose, Maya confirmed. Not human consciousness, but consciousness nonetheless, and it's offering a partnership unlike anything humanity has encountered before. The implications were staggering. Terra Nova wasn't just a planet that humans had colonized. It was a potential ally with millions of years of evolutionary wisdom encoded in its biological systems. The colony that had been established as a sustainability experiment now stood at the threshold of a relationship that could transform humanity's place in the cosmos. 6 months later, a delegation from Earth arrived, responding to the colony's reports about both the Vizeri threat and the planetary consciousness. Scientists, diplomats, and military observers came to witness what many still considered impossible: direct communication with a planetary ecosystem. In a ceremony that blended scientific procedure with something approaching reverence, Maya Chen demonstrated the new neural interface system. Unlike the emergency version used during the crisis, this refined technology allowed limited, controlled connection without risk of consciousness merger. The awareness calls itself Terra Nova, Maya explained to the Earth delegation. Not because it adopted our name, but because that's the closest translation of how it perceives itself. New Earth, a world of continuous renewal and adaptation. And it can communicate complex ideas, asked the skeptical Earth diplomat. In response, Maya activated the interface. The room's lighting shifted as bioluminescent panels responded to the connection. A holographic display showed the neural activity patterns translating between human and planetary consciousness. Terra Nova doesn't communicate in words, Maya explained as the patterns flowed. It thinks in relationships, cycles, and systems, but it understands our need for linguistic interpretation. Through the translation system, the planetary consciousness expressed concepts that left the Earth delegates in stunned silence. Perspectives spanning millions of years, knowledge of ecological systems beyond human science, and a cosmic awareness that suggested Terra Nova was not unique in the galaxy. There are others, Maya translated. Other worlds with similar awareness at various stages of development. Terra Nova has sensed them through means we don't yet understand, perhaps quantum connections between living systems that transcend conventional space. The Earth military observer leaned forward. Is it saying there's a network of sentient planets? Not exactly, Maya clarified. But life throughout the galaxy may be more connected than we ever realized. And now humanity has been invited into that connection. As the delegation departed with their world-changing reports, Maya stood at the edge of the ancient forest where her consciousness had once merged with Terra Nova's awareness. Though no longer directly connected, she retained an intuitive sense of the planetary mind. Its patient rhythms, its vast perspective, its curious interest in the humans who had awakened it. The Vizeri had come seeking resources to extract. They had encountered something they couldn't comprehend. A world that was alive not just with countless individual organisms, but with a collective intelligence that spanned an entire biosphere. They had fled, their worldview shattered by the realization that some planets could fight back. And humanity, which had come to Terra Nova seeking redemption for past ecological mistakes, had found something more profound. A new understanding of their place in a living cosmos where consciousness might take forms they were only beginning to imagine. Maya placed her hand against the rough bark of an ancient tree, feeling the subtle electrical patterns that carried information through the vast network beneath her feet. "We have so much to learn from each other," she whispered. Through some remaining connection, she felt Terranova's response, patient, affirming, and filled with possibilities that would unfold across centuries to come. The story of humanity had entered a new chapter. They were no longer alone in their journey among the stars, and the universe had suddenly become a far more wondrous place than they had ever imagined.